I'm a 26-year-old guy dealing with a situation that's straight out of a drama series, but unfortunately it's real life. For context, I've always had a strained relationship with my mom 54F. She's one of those people who needs to be in control of everything, my career, my life choices, and even my personal decisions. We've gone low contact a few times over the years because of how manipulative she can get, but this time, she's taken it to a whole new level. So, a couple of weeks ago, we had a family dinner at my parents' house. It was supposed to be a casual thing, just me, my dad 56M, my younger sister 22F, and my mom. Everything was normal until we finished eating. Out of nowhere, my mom casually drops a bombshell. She thinks I should consider legally changing my name. Just like that, as if she was suggesting a new Netflix show to watch. I was stunned. I asked her what she was talking about, and she launched into this bizarre explanation. According to her, my birth name no longer fits me. She claimed that when she picked my name, she had a specific vision for my future, a vision where I'd become a doctor, a path I didn't follow. In her mind, since I didn't live up to her expectations, the name has now become wasted potential. She said it with a straight face, as if this made complete sense. The room went dead silent. My dad and sister exchanged awkward glances but didn't say a word. My mom was treating this suggestion like it was no big deal, like it was just a minor adjustment. Meanwhile, I was sitting there, trying to process what she had just said. I told her, flat out, that there was no way I was changing my name. Her response: a dismissive shrug and a comment about how I was being stubborn and making a big deal out of nothing. She insisted it was just a suggestion, something she believed would be good for my future. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, she texted me this long message. It wasn't just a random thought anymore. She had a whole list of reasons why she thought I should change my name. She brought up astrology and numerology, saying that my current name is holding me back in life. It was honestly one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read. She sounded so convinced, though, like she had done all this research just to help me. Things escalated from there. She decided to bring it up in the family group chat, asking everyone what they thought about it. My aunt, her sister, immediately chimed in, saying it might be a fresh start for me. I couldn't believe it. It felt like they were all talking about someone else's life, not mine. I kept quiet in the chat, hoping it would blow over, but it didn't. My girlfriend, Emily 25F, was the only person who seemed to understand how crazy this all was. When I told her about the text and the group chat, she was shocked. She pointed out that my mom's behavior was more about control than anything else. Emily said it felt like my mom was trying to erase my identity because I didn't turn out the way she wanted. It was like she was saying, "You're not the son I envisioned, so let's change who you are." The gaslighting started soon after. My mom began making subtle comments whenever we talked, implying that I'd never really liked my name and that she was just trying to help me realize my true self. It was surreal. She had twisted the entire narrative, making it seem like this was all for my benefit, and that I was the one who had a problem with my name all along. I could feel the pressure building, especially when extended family members started messaging me, saying things like, "Your mom only wants what's best for you." It felt like a coordinated attack, and I started feeling more isolated by the day. Then it escalated even further. I got an email from my mom with an appointment confirmation for a meeting with a lawyer. She had gone ahead and scheduled a consultation to discuss the legal process of changing my name without even telling me beforehand. It was like she had decided this was happening, and I was just supposed to go along with it. I called her, furious. She acted completely innocent, saying it was just a consultation to explore options. She accused me of overreacting and being dramatic, as if she hadn't just tried to change one of the most fundamental parts of my identity behind my back. After the call, I started doubting myself. I wondered if maybe I was being unreasonable, or if this was some unresolved childhood issue on my end. Thankfully, I had a therapy session already scheduled that week. I brought it up with my therapist, who helped me see that my mom's behavior wasn't normal. It was another way for her to manipulate and control me, something she's done my entire life. The realization hit hard, but it also gave me some clarity. After that session, I felt like I needed a second opinion from people outside of my family bubble. I decided to share the story on Reddit to see if anyone else had ever dealt with something like this. I couldn't believe I was actually writing a post about my own mother trying to force a name change, but here we are. So, that's where I'm at now. I've posted this to Reddit because I need to know if I'm the crazy one here, or if this whole situation is as insane as it feels. What would you do if your own mom tried to change your name? I'm genuinely lost and could use some advice. I'll update if anything new happens, but for now I just need a moment to breathe and figure out my next move. Update 1. The response I got from Reddit was massive. The comments and messages flooded in, with people sharing their own stories about manipulative parents, boundary violations, and bizarre control tactics. It was honestly a relief to see that I wasn't overreacting and that this situation was as wild as it felt. The overwhelming advice was clear: stand firm, set boundaries, and don't let her steamroll me. I felt a bit more confident after reading through it all, but that didn't last long. A couple of days after I posted, I was home alone when there was a loud knock on my door. It was my mom. She showed up unannounced, looking way too pleased with herself, holding a thick folder in one hand and a grin that made me nervous. I didn't want to let her in, but she pushed her way through before I could react, dropping the folder on my kitchen table like she owned the place. Inside the folder, legal documents. There were drafts for a name change petition, already filled out with just my signature missing. But that wasn't even the craziest part. She also had a typed-up list of suggested new names, as if this was some kind of fun game. I skimmed through the list, feeling a pit in my stomach. The names she picked were nothing like my current name. They were generic, almost trendy names that had zero connection to my heritage or family history. It was like she was trying to erase who I was and replace me with a person she thought I should be. While I was standing there, stunned, Emily walked into the room. She had been in the other room and must have heard the commotion. She took one look at the paperwork on the table and then at my mom. Without missing a beat, she asked why my mom thought she had the right to decide something so personal for me. My mom's smile dropped instantly. She turned on Emily, accusing her of poisoning my mind and being the reason I was resisting this great opportunity. It escalated fast, with my mom yelling and Emily standing her ground. I've never seen her that angry before, but she wasn't backing down. At one point, my mom actually threatened legal action. She claimed that if I didn't agree to this name change, she could go to court and argue that I was mentally unfit to make my own decisions, citing my supposed erratic behavior as evidence. I could barely believe what I was hearing. She was willing to paint me as unstable just to get her way. After she left, I called the lawyer whose name was on the documents. I needed to understand what was going on. The lawyer was polite but sounded confused when I explained who I was. He told me that my mom had presented the whole thing as a mutual decision, like we'd both agreed to this plan together. She had already paid for the paperwork to be drafted, acting as though I was on board with everything. When I made it clear that I had no intention of changing my name, the lawyer immediately apologized. He said he'd been misled and assured me that nothing would move forward without my explicit consent. It felt good to shut that down, but I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As soon as I got off the phone, my family group chat blew up again. My mom must have called everyone because messages started pouring in. A few relatives accused me of being ungrateful, saying I was blowing this out of proportion. My aunt, who had been neutral up until now, chimed in with a message that made my blood boil. She revealed that she and my mom had been planning this name change for months, thinking of it as a gift to help me get a fresh start. The betrayal stung, but it was clear they didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing. I tried to ignore it, but then I got a long email from my mom. It was pages of guilt tripping, saying she only wanted to help me reach my full potential and that by keeping my current name I was throwing away my future. It was like she genuinely believed she was doing something noble and couldn't understand why I was fighting it. After that, I knew I had to protect myself. I spent the next few hours researching my legal rights, trying to figure out if there was any way she could force this. Thankfully, I found out that without my consent, she had no legal grounds to proceed with the name change. But I realized this wasn't just about a name anymore. It was about her trying to control me even as an adult. Later that night, a few of my cousins messaged me privately. They told me they thought the whole situation was insane, but they were too scared to say anything publicly because they didn't want to get on my mom's bad side. It was validating, but also frustrating to know how deep her manipulation ran in the family. Then came the final straw. My mom announced she was organizing a family meeting to discuss my future. She didn't even ask me if I was available, just sent out a message with the date and time, like it was a done deal. I knew exactly what this was, an intervention to pressure me into going along with her plan. I didn't even respond. I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. I decided then and there to go no contact for a while. I blocked her number, left the family group chat, and sent a message to the few family members I trusted, letting them know I needed space. I went back to Reddit and posted an update, thanking everyone for their support. I told them what had happened and that I was taking steps to protect myself legally. The response was incredible, and it gave me the strength I needed to stay firm. This isn't over yet, but at least now I know I'm not alone in this fight. I'll keep everyone posted as things develop. Update 2. I wasn't planning on attending the family intervention, but something happened that made me change my mind. Out of nowhere, I got a message from my estranged uncle, my mom's brother. I haven't spoken to him in years. He moved away when I was a kid and has mostly stayed out of the family drama. His message was short and to the point. He warned me that the intervention wasn't just about the name change. He hinted there was a deeper motive, something that had been in the works for a while. He told me to be careful, and that was enough to make me reconsider. Around the same time, my mom ramped up her campaign. She called my dad, who has been divorced from her for years. They don't get along at all, but she still tried to convince him to pressure me into attending the intervention. My dad called me after their conversation, and for the first time in a long time, he was on my side. He said he was fed up with her manipulative tactics and told me not to let her bully me into anything. The next day, my mom called me, probably feeling confident after setting up this intervention. During the call, she slipped up. While going on about how this name change was in my best interest, she accidentally mentioned that it would make things easier financially. When I asked her what she meant, she immediately tried to change the subject, but it was too late. That one phrase sent me down a rabbit hole. I started digging into old family documents, looking through anything I could find related to finances. It took a while, but I eventually stumbled across a vague reference to a trust fund set up by my grandparents. It was in my name, but no one had ever talked to me about it. I hadn't even known it existed until now. It seemed like the fund had been set aside for me when I was born, but there were no recent records or updates. I started connecting the dots and realized there might be more to this push for a name change than just my mom's obsession with control. Emily took it a step further. She's good at finding information online, so she started digging too. After a few hours, she came to me with what she had found. Apparently, the trust fund is tied to my legal birth name. If my name is changed, access to the fund could potentially revert back to the trustee, who is, of course, my mother. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just about the name change, it was a money grab. Armed with this new information, I decided to go to the intervention. I needed answers, and this was my chance to confront her in front of the whole family. When I arrived, the room was packed. My mom, my aunt, a couple of cousins, and even my sister were all there, looking like they were preparing for a group therapy session. The tension was thick, and it didn't take long for things to go off the rails. My mom started the meeting with her usual script, talking about how the name change was meant to help me grow and how she just wanted what was best for me. I let her go on for a bit before I interrupted and dropped the bombshell. I asked her in front of everyone why she hadn't mentioned the trust fund tied to my legal name. The room went silent. My mom's face turned pale, and she stumbled over her words, trying to deny it. That's when my dad, who had shown up last minute, stepped in. He backed me up, saying he knew about the trust fund but was never informed of any recent changes. My aunt, who had been sitting there quietly, suddenly spoke up. She admitted that she and my mom had been planning this together for months. They wanted to secure control of the trust fund, and they figured the easiest way was to push me into changing my name. She tried to justify it by saying that I wasn't mature enough to handle the money and that they were only looking out for me. The room erupted into chaos. Family members were shouting over each other, taking sides. My sister, who I thought would side with my mom, stood up for me instead. She told everyone she was sick of our mom's manipulative behavior and that it was time to stop enabling her. I'd had enough. I announced that I was going no contact with my mom and aunt, and I walked out. My mom shouted after me, accusing me of tearing the family apart, but I didn't look back. The next day, I contacted a new lawyer who specializes in family trusts. I needed to protect myself and secure my rights to the trust fund before my mom tried anything else. The lawyer confirmed what Emily had found. Any changes to my legal name could complicate my claim to the trust. He advised me to take immediate legal action to prevent my mom from interfering further. Since then, my mom has started a full-on smear campaign. She's been calling extended family members, telling them I'm having a mental breakdown and need to be institutionalized. I've been getting messages from distant relatives, some of them concerned, others accusing me of being ungrateful. It's exhausting, and I'm seriously considering filing for a restraining order at this point. Emily suggested it might be the only way to get her to back off. In therapy, I had a breakthrough. I realized this entire mess is just another attempt by my mom to control me, something she's been doing my whole life. But I'm done letting her dictate who I am. I'm taking steps to protect myself and my future. I posted an update on Reddit, letting everyone know what happened. The support has been incredible, and it's helping me stay strong as I prepare for the legal battle ahead. For the first time, I feel like I understand what's really going on here, and I'm ready to fight back. I'll keep everyone posted as things develop, but at least now I have a clear plan and the support of people who believe me. This isn't over yet. Update 3. After the intervention fiasco, I knew I had no choice but to take legal action. The first thing I did was meet with my lawyer again. We officially filed the paperwork to secure my rights to the trust fund and put a stop to any potential name changes without my consent. My lawyer warned me that this could get messy, especially if my mother decided to escalate things. And she did, immediately. Within a week, I got served with a counterclaim from my mom's attorney. This wasn't some random lawyer either. She had hired a high-powered attorney known for handling complex family disputes. Her legal response accused me of being mentally unfit to manage my own finances, claiming I was acting erratically and making poor decisions because of Emily's influence. I was stunned. I expected her to fight back, but this was a whole new level. She was willing to try and paint me as incompetent just to gain control. Emily, as always, was my rock during this. We started gathering every piece of evidence we could find. We went through years of old text messages, emails, and even social media posts where my mom's manipulative behavior was on full display. There were messages where she'd berate me for not following her vision for my life, passive-aggressive comments about my career choices, and clear examples of her trying to control major decisions. It was a painful process, but we knew it was necessary. My dad stepped up too, which surprised me. He showed up at my apartment one evening with a folder of documents. Inside were old letters and financial statements that proved the existence of the trust fund and clearly outlined my legal right to it. He apologized for not being more involved when I was younger, admitting that he had ignored a lot of red flags about my mom's behavior back then. It felt like a small but significant turning point in our relationship. A preliminary court date was scheduled, and the preparations began in full swing. Meanwhile, my mom was on a rampage. She started spreading lies to anyone who would listen, telling family members that I was trying to bankrupt her out of spite. The family group chat became a battlefield. Some relatives believed her, saying things like, "Why would a son try to destroy his own mother?" Others started questioning her version of events, especially after what happened at the intervention. Then something unexpected happened. One of my cousins, who had been silent throughout all of this, reached out to me privately. She told me she had overheard a conversation between my mom and aunt a few months ago. They were discussing using the trust fund money for a risky real estate investment. That's when it all clicked for her, and she realized why my mom was pushing so hard for the name change. She offered to testify if needed, knowing it would probably cause a huge rift in the family. I thanked her, feeling a small glimmer of hope. The next day, my mom took her meltdown public. She went on a rant on social media, posting a series of cryptic messages about betrayal and family loyalty. Her followers, who had no idea what was really going on, ate it up. They flooded my DMs with hate messages, calling me a terrible son and accusing me of being manipulated by Emily. It was a nightmare, but I wasn't about to back down. Things escalated further when my mom showed up at my workplace. She marched into the lobby, demanding to speak with me. I wasn't even there at the time, but my coworkers called security, and she was escorted out. That was the final straw. I filed for a restraining order the next day, and to my relief, the judge granted a temporary order. It felt like a small victory, but I knew there was still a long road ahead. The fallout from all of this started to ripple through the family. My sister, who had defended me at the intervention, decided to go no contact with our mom as well. She told me she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Her decision seemed to wake some people up. More relatives began questioning my mom's actions, and the narrative started to shift. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my aunt. The same aunt who had been working with my mom to push the name change. She sounded different, almost regretful. She confessed that she had only gone along with the plan because she was afraid of my mom's wrath. She said she was tired of living in fear and wanted to come clean. It was hard to trust her after everything, but it felt like another crack in my mom's armor. In therapy, I had a breakthrough moment. My therapist helped me see that this entire battle wasn't just about the trust fund or even the name change. It was about control that my mom had exerted over me my entire life. But now, for the first time, I was fighting back and refusing to let her dictate my future. The court date was approaching fast. My lawyer and I prepared a solid case, including character witnesses and a mountain of evidence showcasing her manipulative tactics. My dad, Emily, and even my cousin were ready to testify if needed. The night before the hearing, I got a voicemail from my mom. It was tearful and full of emotion, begging me to drop the case and come back to the family. It would have been convincing if I hadn't seen this tactic from her so many times before. I shared an update on Reddit, detailing everything that had happened and how we were preparing for court. The support was overwhelming. People shared their own experiences with manipulative family members, and it gave me the strength I needed. This community had become a lifeline, reminding me I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. The update ends here as I'm about to walk into the courthouse. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm ready to fight for my rights, my identity, and my future. Whatever comes next, I know I'm not alone in this anymore. I'll post another update as soon as I can. Wish me luck. Update 4. Walking into the courthouse felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The tension was thick in the air, and as I glanced around, I noticed several extended family members had shown up. Some were clearly there to support my mother, while others gave me sympathetic looks, like they finally understood what I'd been dealing with. Whispers filled the room, and I could feel the glares from those who had already made up their minds. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was about to unfold. The proceedings started with my mother taking the stand. She was the picture of a distressed parent, tears in her eyes, voice trembling as she spoke. She launched into a long, emotional plea, painting herself as a loving mother who was only trying to help her confused son. She claimed I had been acting erratically for months and suggested that my behavior was the result of manipulation by Emily. According to her, Emily was the one who put these ideas in my head and convinced me to go against my own family. It was a masterclass in theatrics, and I could see some of the spectators nodding along, clearly buying her act. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood up and began presenting the evidence we had gathered. He didn't waste any time. He started with a series of text messages and emails, projecting them on a screen for everyone to see. They showed a pattern of my mother's manipulative behavior over the years, messages where she belittled my choices, pressured me to follow her plans, and even admitted outright that she wanted control over the trust fund. The judge's face shifted from neutral to visibly concerned as he read through the exchanges. Next, Emily took the stand. She was calm and collected, a stark contrast to my mother's performance. She laid out the timeline of events clearly, starting from the bizarre suggestion to change my name all the way to the threats of legal action. She explained how my mom's behavior had escalated, detailing the unannounced visit with legal paperwork and the aggressive pressure to comply. The room was silent as she spoke, and I could tell that her composure was having an impact. It was obvious who the rational party was in this situation. Then came the big reveal. My lawyer pulled out a financial document from the original trust fund agreement. He explained its significance to the court, pointing out a specific clause. The trust could only be accessed by me using my legal birth name. If my name were changed, the trust would be voided, and control would revert to the trustee, my mother. The courtroom went dead silent. This was the smoking gun we had been waiting for. My mother's reaction was immediate and explosive. She shot up from her seat, yelling that it was all a misunderstanding. Her calm, concerned mother act vanished in an instant, replaced by raw anger. The judge had to reprimand her, telling her to sit down and remain silent. It was like watching a mask slip off, and I could see the shocked expressions on the faces of some of my relatives who had supported her. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more surprising, my estranged uncle stepped forward as a surprise witness. He took the stand, and for the first time he spoke openly about what he knew. He admitted that my mom had confided in him months ago about her plan to access the trust fund. She had intended to use the money for a risky real estate investment she'd been eyeing. He apologized to me, saying he hadn't come forward sooner because he was afraid of her retaliation. His testimony was the final nail in the coffin. The judge, now clearly unimpressed with my mother's actions, turned to her and asked why she hadn't disclosed the existence of the trust fund earlier. She stammered, unable to give a coherent answer. The silence was deafening. My aunt, who had been one of my mom's biggest supporters, started crying and abruptly left the courtroom. Other family members began whispering among themselves, and I caught my sister's eye from across the room. She gave me a small nod of support, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. After a brief recess, the judge returned with his decision. He ruled in my favor, granting a permanent injunction that prevented any changes to my legal name without my explicit consent. He also made a pointed suggestion that I consider pursuing legal action for emotional distress and financial manipulation, given the evidence presented. As soon as the verdict was announced, my mother had a full-blown meltdown. She started screaming that I had been brainwashed by Emily, accusing me of abandoning the family. Security had to escort her out of the courtroom as she continued yelling, leaving everyone in stunned silence. After the dust settled, several family members approached me quietly. They apologized for not believing me earlier, admitting they had been manipulated by my mother's sob stories. It felt surreal to hear, but I accepted their apologies. I wasn't interested in holding grudges. I just wanted this nightmare to end. Later that day, I met with my therapist to unpack everything that had happened. We talked through the intense emotions of the courtroom battle, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was a bittersweet relief, knowing that I had won, but also realizing how far my mom had gone in her attempts to control me. I decided to take the judge's advice and filed a separate lawsuit against my mother for emotional damages and her unauthorized attempts to alter my legal documents. As I was leaving the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. My mother's attorney had already reached out, wanting to discuss a settlement. I shared the outcome on Reddit, thanking everyone for their unwavering support. The response was incredible, with people cheering me on and offering advice on next steps. I ended the update with a cliffhanger, hinting at the potential settlement discussions. I'll keep everyone posted, but for now it feels like the tide has finally turned in my favor. Update 5. After the court ruling, I expected a bit of quiet before the next wave hit. I was wrong. My lawyer contacted me almost immediately, saying my mother's attorney had sent over a settlement offer. It was a pretty hefty sum of money, more than I expected. But there was a catch. The settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement (NDA), which would prevent me from talking about any of this publicly ever again. They wanted me to drop the emotional distress lawsuit and, in exchange, keep everything that happened buried. We reviewed the offer carefully. My lawyer explained that the money was substantial, and it would definitely help me move on and start fresh. But it wasn't sitting right with me. Signing the NDA felt like giving my mom exactly what she wanted: control over my voice. She'd get to rewrite the narrative, claim victory, and continue playing the victim. After everything I had been through, staying silent felt like another loss. I decided to turn to Reddit for advice. I posted a poll, laying out the situation and asking whether I should take the settlement or continue with the lawsuit. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people weighed in, sharing their own stories of toxic family members and urging me not to let my mother silence me. The message was clear: don't sign away my voice. It felt empowering to see so many people backing me up, strangers who understood why this mattered. I told my lawyer to reject the settlement. He wasn't surprised by my decision and said he'd proceed with the lawsuit. The very next day, my mom took to social media again. She posted another long, cryptic message about family loyalty, betrayal, and how I was being manipulated. It was clearly aimed at me, but this time it backfired. Family members who had been in the courtroom started commenting, calling her out for the lies. They reminded her of the testimony, the evidence, and the fact that she had been exposed. It was the first time I'd seen the tide turn publicly against her. In the middle of all this chaos, I got a call from my dad. He asked if we could meet for coffee, and I agreed. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. When we sat down, he apologized for not being there more during my childhood. He admitted he'd seen signs of my mom's manipulative behavior but didn't intervene because he was caught up in his own issues. He promised to do better from now on. It felt like a small step towards healing, and for once I believed him. Not long after, I received an unexpected email from my aunt. She had been one of my mother's biggest supporters, but this time her tone was different. She admitted she'd been manipulated and had gone along with my mom's plans because she was scared of her. She offered a genuine apology and even said she was willing to testify on my behalf if the emotional distress lawsuit went to trial. I didn't expect it, but it was nice to see that people were starting to realize the truth. Emily, who had been my rock throughout all of this, brought up an idea. She suggested that we move away from the city and start fresh somewhere new, far away from the family drama. The thought of leaving it all behind and starting over was like a breath of fresh air. We started looking into different places, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. Before we left, I had one last therapy session. My therapist congratulated me on standing up for myself and taking control of my own story. We talked about how far I'd come, from being manipulated and controlled to finally taking a stand. It felt like I was closing a chapter of my life that had been weighing me down for years. The emotional distress lawsuit eventually settled in my favor. The judge awarded me a significant sum and reprimanded my mother for her manipulative actions. The courtroom was silent as she stormed out, defeated. I didn't feel victorious, just relieved that it was finally over. After the court case was settled, I decided to go completely no contact with both my mother and my aunt. I sent a final message to the family group chat explaining my decision. I wished them all well, but made it clear that I needed to prioritize my mental health and that this was goodbye. The reactions were mixed, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Emily and I moved to a new city not long after. I found a job that I'm genuinely passionate about, and we've started building a life together. At first, the absence of family drama felt strange, like there was something missing. But quickly, it became a source of peace. We've been exploring our new home, making new friends, and focusing on the future. It feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. One day, I received an email from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She thanked me for standing up to our manipulative relatives and shared her own story of emotional abuse. She said she had found comfort in my courage, and that it had inspired her to set boundaries in her own life. It was a touching reminder that speaking up had made a difference, not just for me but for others who were trapped in similar situations. I made a final post on Reddit reflecting on everything that had happened. I thanked the community for their support and encouragement, sharing that I was finally at peace with my decision. I encouraged others to stand up for themselves, even if it meant going against their own family. The post went viral, with thousands of comments praising my strength and resilience. It was the perfect closure to this chapter of my life. I ended the post with a message of hope. I'm ready to leave the past behind and look forward to a brighter future. For the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely happy and excited about what's next. Thank you to everyone who stood by me. Your support made all the difference. Here's to new beginnings. I'm a 27-year-old guy, the eldest of two siblings. My younger brother, Sam, is 23. Growing up, I always felt like I was the one who had to be responsible, while Sam was the golden child who could do no wrong. It's something I noticed as a teenager, but looking back, it's been this way for as long as I can remember. My parents would lean on me for help with chores, push me to get good grades, and constantly remind me to look after your little brother. Meanwhile, Sam was the carefree kid who got away with pretty much everything. To paint a clearer picture, I moved out at 18. I wanted my independence and knew I couldn't rely on my parents for support. I paid my way through college, worked part-time jobs, and eventually built a stable career. I've made it on my own because I had to. Sam, on the other hand, took a different path. He switched majors a few times, dropped out of college, and moved back home more than once. My parents have been there to catch him every time he falls, covering his rent, paying off his debts, and bailing him out of trouble. I never realized how much they'd been doing for him until recently. The real issue started about a month ago. My grandparents passed away a few years back and left their house to me and Sam, split 50/50. It's not a mansion, but it's a solid property in a good neighborhood, and it meant a lot to them. I've always thought of it as a safety net. I've worked hard to be self-sufficient, but knowing I had that piece of security gave me some peace of mind. I figured one day we'd either sell it and split the proceeds, or maybe one of us would decide to live there. But then my parents came to me with a proposal that left me speechless. They sat me down and basically told me that Sam needs the house more than you do. They want me to sign over my share of the inheritance so that Sam can have the entire property. They said he's struggling right now and this would give him the fresh start he needs. According to them, I'm already doing well for myself, so I shouldn't need it as much as he does. I was stunned. I asked them why they thought this was fair, why I should give up something that's supposed to be mine too. They told me I was being selfish and needed to think about how hard things have been for Sam. He recently dropped out of college again and lost his latest job. My mom looked at me with this pleading expression saying he just needs a bit of help right now. You're strong, you've always been strong. Sam isn't as strong as you are. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. I've worked my entire life to get where I am without any help from them. Meanwhile, they've been supporting Sam from the shadows, and now they want me to give up what little I've been given. It was clear they didn't care about what this house means to me. They only care about bailing Sam out of yet another mess. I tried to explain that I've faced struggles too. There were nights I couldn't afford more than ramen for dinner, times when I worked double shifts just to make rent. I never had the luxury of going back home when things got tough, but they just dismissed it. My dad said, "You turned out fine, didn't you? You're doing well now, so why can't you just help your brother out? He's at his breaking point." They made me feel like I was being the bad guy for not wanting to give up what's rightfully mine. The more they talked, the clearer it became that they've chosen Sam over me once again. The worst part is, this wasn't a discussion. It felt like they were telling me what was going to happen, not asking for my opinion. They genuinely believed I would just roll over and say yes. When I pushed back, my mom actually started crying, saying, "I just want what's best for both of you. This is tearing our family apart. Why can't you just see that he needs it more?" I couldn't take it anymore and left. I needed time to think, and honestly, I'm still processing everything. I've always known they favored Sam, but this feels like a whole new level of betrayal. It's not just favoritism, it's blatant and hurtful. They expect me to give up a piece of my future because my brother made bad choices, and they don't want to let him face the consequences. I decided to post here because I don't know what to do next. Part of me feels like I'm being selfish for holding onto the house, but another part of me is angry. Why should I be punished for being the responsible one? Why should I sacrifice what little I have because my brother can't get his act together? I thought maybe if I shared this, I could get some perspective. Right now, it feels like I'm drowning in their expectations and guilt tripping. I haven't spoken to my parents since that conversation. Sam hasn't reached out either, which honestly just confirms what I suspected. He's fully expecting to get the house. He probably thinks I'll cave like I always do. But this time, it feels different. I don't know if I can just let this go. I feel like I've been pushed too far, and I don't want to keep playing this role where I'm the strong, selfless one who gets nothing in return. I'm at a crossroads here. Do I stand my ground and risk alienating my entire family, or do I give in and let them have their way yet again? I'm honestly torn, and I could really use some outside perspective on this. Thanks for listening. Update 1. So, I read through the responses on my first post, and honestly, I was overwhelmed by the support. It felt like validation I hadn't gotten in years. People were telling me to stand my ground, to not give in to my parents' guilt-tripping tactics. It gave me the push I needed to confront them again and finally put everything on the table. I went over to their house the next weekend, planning to have a calm conversation. But as soon as I walked in, I could tell they already knew about the Reddit post. My mom's face was a mix of shock and anger, and my dad was pacing around the living room, looking ready to explode. Before I could even get a word in, my dad started yelling about how I'd betrayed the family by airing our private issues online for strangers to judge. They couldn't believe I'd stooped so low, according to them. I tried to explain that I was just looking for advice, that I felt like I had no one else to turn to, but they weren't having it. They doubled down on their argument from before, saying that I was lucky to be in a good financial position while Sam was struggling to make ends meet. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't just help him out, why I was being so selfish over a house I didn't even need. At this point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked them why they thought it was okay to ignore everything I'd done to get where I am today. I reminded them that I moved out at 18, put myself through college, and never once asked them for a single dollar. Meanwhile, Sam had dropped out of college twice, quit multiple jobs, and had been living off their support. Why were they rewarding his bad decisions and punishing me for being independent? My dad just shook his head, saying I was being heartless. He accused me of lacking empathy for my brother's situation. That's when I snapped and started listing all the ways they'd been secretly helping Sam for years, paying off his credit card debt, covering his rent when he couldn't make payments, even funding one of his failed business ventures. I could see the shock on my mom's face. She clearly didn't expect me to know all of this. It was like a switch flipped. My mom tried to downplay it, saying they were just trying to help Sam get back on his feet. She started tearing up, saying that family is about supporting each other, especially when someone is at their breaking point. I realized then that this wasn't just about the house, it was about a pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. They'd been enabling Sam, covering for him, and letting him skate by without facing any real consequences, while I was left to fend for myself. I decided to go straight to the source. I wanted to hear from Sam himself, to see if he really believed he deserved the entire house. I called him up and asked if we could meet. We ended up talking at a nearby coffee shop. I started by telling him how blindsided I felt by the whole situation, how hurt I was that he'd go along with this plan without even talking to me first. Sam was defensive from the get-go. He said I was blowing things out of proportion and that it wasn't a big deal. He kept repeating that I didn't need the house since I had a good job, and he was just trying to get back on his feet. He made it sound like I was being unreasonable for not giving up my share, like I was the one being selfish. I realized right then that he fully expected to get the house without lifting a finger. He wasn't just going along with our parents' plan, he was counting on it. I left that conversation feeling completely defeated. It was clear that Sam didn't see anything wrong with what was happening. In his mind, it made perfect sense that he should get the house because he needed it more. He couldn't see past his own entitlement to understand how unfair this was to me. I decided I needed to take a step back from the whole situation. I texted my parents and Sam letting them know I needed time to think and didn't want to discuss the inheritance for a while. That's when the guilt tripping started. Within a few days, I was getting bombarded with messages from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins. They'd clearly been fed a very biased version of events by my parents. The messages ranged from, "I'm sure you don't want to break your mother's heart to family should come first. Don't be greedy." It was like a coordinated attack designed to make me cave under the pressure. I couldn't believe it. My parents had gone to the entire family, painting me as the villain who was tearing us apart over a piece of property. No one seemed to care about my side of the story, about everything I'd been through. It was all about poor Sam and how he needed help. I realized I couldn't keep reading these messages without losing my mind, so I started blocking numbers and putting up boundaries. I decided to focus on my own mental health and step away from the toxic drama for a bit. The only person who reached out with genuine concern was my aunt, the same one who'd always been a bit of a black sheep in the family. She told me she'd heard what was going on and couldn't believe how my parents were handling it. She even hinted that she knew more about my grandparents' intentions for the inheritance, but she didn't want to say too much over the phone. I ended this update by posting on Reddit again, thanking everyone for their support. I let them know that, for now, I'm stepping back from the family chaos to regroup and figure out my next move. It's strange, but I feel more validated by strangers on the internet than I ever have by my own family. Update 2. I didn't think things could get worse, but I was wrong. Just a few days after I started blocking the guilt-tripping messages from my extended family, I got a call from my parents. It wasn't like our usual strained conversations. There was a serious tone in my dad's voice that set off alarm bells in my head. He didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, he went straight into an ultimatum. Either I agree to sign over my share of the inheritance, or they will disinherit me entirely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked them what they meant by disinherit, and my mom jumped in, sounding almost desperate. They told me they'd rewrite their own will, cutting me out of everything, including any family heirlooms or future assets. It was a move straight out of a soap opera. My mom tried to soften the blow by saying they were doing this because they were trying to keep the family together, and that my refusal to give up the house was tearing us apart. I realized then that this wasn't just about helping Sam anymore. This was about control. They didn't expect me to fight back, and now that I was, they were willing to go nuclear. I knew I couldn't make any decisions on the spot, so I told them I needed time to think and hung up. It was one of the hardest calls I've ever had to make. After that, I decided I needed to get some proper legal advice. I found a local attorney who specialized in inheritance disputes and scheduled a meeting. I laid everything out for him: the will, the ultimatum, the years of favoritism. He listened carefully and then told me that I had a solid case. According to him, the grandparents' will was very clear. The house was meant to be split equally between me and Sam, and my parents couldn't force me to sign over my share without my consent. Hearing that was a relief, but it also left me feeling conflicted. The thought of taking legal action against my own parents made me feel sick, but at the same time, I couldn't let them bully me into giving up what was rightfully mine. The lawyer advised me to hold my ground and not make any hasty decisions. He told me that if they wanted to fight, they'd be the ones facing the uphill battle. After the meeting, I decided to take a step back and get some distance from the whole situation. My best friend suggested I take a vacation, just to clear my head and figure out my next move. It sounded like a good idea, so I booked a last-minute trip to a quiet beach town for a week. I didn't tell my family where I was going, just that I needed some time away. The break was nice for a while. But then the messages started again. This time, it was Sam reaching out. He wasn't pleading or apologizing, though. He was sending passive-aggressive texts, saying things like, "Hope you're enjoying your vacation while the rest of us are dealing with the mess you created, and must be nice to be the one who doesn't care if the family falls apart." It was clear he was trying to make me feel guilty, like I was the one causing all this chaos by not just handing over the house. I ignored his messages, but they left a bad taste in my mouth. It felt like he was more upset about not getting the house than about the family actually falling apart. It made me realize just how entitled he'd become. It wasn't just my parents enabling him, he had come to expect it as his right. Then, out of the blue, my aunt called me. She's the same one who reached out before, the one who's always been a bit of an outsider in the family drama. She told me she'd heard about the ultimatum and wanted to give me a heads up. Apparently, my grandparents knew exactly how things might play out after they passed away. They'd seen the favoritism towards Sam and left specific instructions in a letter attached to the will. The letter clearly stated that they wanted the house split equally because they didn't want any one sibling to be favored over the other. This new information hit me hard. It felt like my grandparents had foreseen this exact scenario and tried to prevent it. I couldn't believe my parents were still pushing this narrative, knowing full well what my grandparents had intended. I thanked my aunt for telling me and realized then that I needed to stand my ground. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about years of being undervalued, of my hard work being dismissed, and of my parents' clear favoritism towards Sam. I called my parents and told them that I wasn't going to sign over my share of the house. They didn't take it well. My dad was fuming, and my mom started crying, saying that they needed time to cool off and would talk to me later. It was clear they weren't expecting me to actually stand up to them. They thought I'd fold under the pressure. The days after that call were rough. I felt like I was mourning the loss of the family I thought I had. I tried to distract myself, but it was hard not to think about everything that had happened. I decided to post another update on Reddit, just to get it off my chest. The support was incredible. People shared their own stories of family favoritism and told me I was doing the right thing by standing my ground. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone. For now, I'm staying firm in my decision. I know this isn't over yet, but I'm ready for whatever comes next. I've made peace with the fact that my relationship with my parents might never be the same again. And honestly, that might be for the best. At least now I'm finally putting myself first. Update 3. After the drama with the ultimatum and taking time away on vacation, I felt ready to face whatever was coming next. I returned home feeling a bit more centered, only to walk into a complete nightmare. I drove over to the inherited house, planning to check on it and maybe start figuring out what my next steps would be. But when I got there, my key didn't work. They had changed the locks. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. I tried the key a few more times, but it was clear they'd locked me out. There was a note taped to the front door from my parents. It was short, just a few lines saying that they had changed the locks for security reasons and that I should contact them if I wanted to discuss it further. I knew immediately this wasn't about security, it was a power play. They were trying to force my hand, thinking I'd give up the fight if they made it difficult for me. I didn't waste any time. I drove straight to my lawyer's office and showed him the note. He looked at it and shook his head, saying this was a clear violation of my legal rights. He drafted a cease and desist letter right there, demanding that my parents give me access to the property immediately or face legal consequences. He sent it off that same day. Things escalated quickly after that. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. Sam had taken to social media, posting a long rant about how I was kicking him out of his home and how I wanted to see my own brother homeless. He painted this picture of me as the greedy, heartless older brother who didn't care about family. The post got a lot of attention, with my parents and even some extended family members sharing it and adding their own comments, backing him up. It was like watching a smear campaign unfold in real time. Sam's friends were commenting things like, "Can't believe your own brother would do this to you, and stay strong, you'll get through this." My phone was blowing up with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking why I was being so cruel to Sam. I didn't respond to any of it. I knew anything I said would just add fuel to the fire. That same afternoon, I got a call from one of my cousins, the same one who had been quietly supportive throughout this whole ordeal. She sounded nervous, but she told me she had something important to share. Apparently, Sam had already listed the house for rent online. He was planning to use the rental income to fund another one of his business ventures. He'd been so confident that I would cave in and hand over my share that he'd started making plans before it was even his. Hearing this was the final straw for me. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about Sam's complete disregard for me, his assumption that he could steamroll over me with our parents' support. He wasn't just expecting me to give up the house, he was counting on it as part of his next get-rich-quick scheme. I thanked my cousin for the tip and called my lawyer again. I told him we were going to court. Filing the lawsuit was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, but I didn't see any other option. My lawyer reassured me that we had a strong case. The will was explicit about the house being split equally, and my parents changing the locks without my consent was a blatant violation. Still, it didn't make me feel any better. I never wanted it to get to this point, but they had pushed me into a corner. Once the lawsuit was filed, things got even messier. Sam doubled down on his social media campaign, posting screenshots of the legal documents and calling me out by name. He made it seem like I was trying to bankrupt him, that I was obsessed with money and didn't care if he ended up on the street. It was all lies, but the narrative was spreading. Even people who didn't know us personally were commenting and taking sides. Support from Reddit was the only thing keeping me grounded during this time. I posted another update, laying out the facts and explaining why I had to take legal action. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of family disputes, favoritism, and inheritance battles. It made me realize how common this kind of situation is, but also how wrong it was that I had to go through it at all. A few days before the first court hearing, I broke down. I was sitting in my car outside the lawyer's office, feeling like the weight of the entire world was on my shoulders. I didn't want this. I never wanted to go to war with my own family, but I felt like I had no other choice. If I backed down now, I'd be giving up everything I'd worked for, everything my grandparents intended for me. I'd be letting Sam and my parents win, and I couldn't do that. The court hearing was tense. My parents and Sam sat on the opposite side of the room, not once making eye contact with me. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer presented the case, emphasizing the will's clear language and the illegal lock change. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that they were acting in the best interest of the family, but it fell flat. The judge issued a temporary injunction, ordering them to give me access to the house and forbidding any rental agreements until the case was resolved. As we walked out of the courtroom, my parents and Sam brushed right past me. My mom glanced back once, her face a mix of anger and disappointment, but she didn't say a word. I went home feeling drained, but also a little lighter. It wasn't over yet, but I'd taken a stand. I'd finally put my foot down, even if it meant losing my family in the process. I ended my latest Reddit post by thanking everyone for their continued support. I don't know what's going to happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing what's right, not just for me, but for the memory of my grandparents who wanted this house to be shared fairly. I just hope it's enough. Update 4. After filing the lawsuit, things moved fast. My lawyer submitted the paperwork, officially naming my parents and Sam as defendants. He assured me we had a strong case. The will was clear about the inheritance being split equally. It felt surreal to be going up against my own family in court, but I had no choice. They were the ones who had locked me out and given me that ultimatum. Now they were acting like I was the villain for actually standing up for myself. The backlash from my parents was immediate. They called me furious, accusing me of being greedy and heartless. My dad kept repeating that I was tearing the family apart over a piece of property, and my mom kept crying, asking how I could do this after everything they've done for me. I reminded them that it was their decision to change the locks, their decision to push me into a corner. I couldn't let them keep steamrolling over me just because Sam wanted the house. Sam wasn't any better. He was back on social media, posting updates about how I was only in it for the money. He made it sound like I was trying to bankrupt him, painting himself as the victim who was being left out in the cold. It was hard to ignore, especially when mutual friends started reaching out, asking why I couldn't just let Sam have the house since I didn't need it. I decided not to engage with any of it. Responding would just give him more ammunition, and I needed to focus on the legal process. A week before the first court hearing, the judge issued a temporary injunction. This stopped Sam from renting out the house or making any changes to it until the case was resolved. When I found out, I could almost feel Sam's anger from across town. He had been banking on that rental income for his next business idea. I heard from a mutual friend that he was telling everyone I'd ruined his chances of getting back on his feet. It was all so predictable at this point. Sam would never take responsibility. It was easier to blame me for his problems. Then something unexpected happened. I got a message from my maternal grandmother. She'd been completely silent throughout this entire ordeal, so I wasn't sure what to expect. When I called her back, she sounded tired but firm. She told me she was disappointed in how my parents were handling the situation and that she wanted to help. She dropped a bombshell. My grandparents had actually left a letter with the will, explaining their decision to split the inheritance equally. They knew there was a risk my parents might try to favor Sam, and they wanted to make sure things were fair. My grandmother offered to testify on my behalf. She said she knew my grandparents well, and they had been very clear about their intentions. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I thanked her and let my lawyer know right away. He said this was a game changer. Having a direct family member willing to speak up in court would make a big difference. Right after that, my parents called, demanding a family meeting before the court date. They said they wanted to resolve things peacefully. I wasn't sure if I believed them, but part of me still hoped there could be a breakthrough, so I agreed. The meeting was a disaster from the start. My dad started off with his usual speech about how I was destroying the family over a piece of property. My mom was crying again, talking about how ungrateful I was for everything they'd done for me. I listened quietly until they were done, then I laid out the facts. I reminded them that I'd been on my own since I was 18, that I put myself through college, and never once asked them for help. Meanwhile, they had been bailing Sam out of every mess he'd gotten himself into, and now they wanted me to just hand over the one thing that was supposed to be split equally. Sam couldn't keep quiet. He jumped in, saying that my independence was proof I didn't need the house, unlike him. He made it sound like my success was a reason to punish me. That's when my mom blurted out the truth I'd always suspected but never heard out loud. We always thought Sam needed more help because he's the more sensitive one. We never worried about you because you were strong. There it was. They'd mistaken my resilience for invincibility my entire life. I realized then that this meeting wasn't about finding a resolution. It was about them justifying their favoritism, trying to convince me one last time to back down. I got up and left without another word. The court hearing came soon after. My parents and Sam sat on one side of the room, looking angry and defiant. My lawyer presented the case, focusing on the clear language of the will and the illegal lock change. Then he pulled out the letter my grandmother had told me about. The judge read it out loud. It was a simple, heartfelt letter from my grandparents, explaining that they wanted the house split equally because they loved both of their grandsons and wanted things to be fair, especially knowing how my parents had favored Sam in the past. The courtroom was silent. My parents looked like they'd been slapped in the face. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me legal access to the house and ordering my parents and Sam to stop interfering with my share. It was over. As we walked out of the courtroom, my parents and Sam didn't even look at me. I tried to approach them, but my mom stopped me, her face cold and distant. "You've made your choice," she said. "Don't expect us to be there when you need us." I went home feeling empty. I had won the case, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of whatever relationship I had left with my family. I posted one last update on Reddit, thanking everyone for their support. I admitted I was struggling to come to terms with what had happened, but I knew I had done the right thing. Standing up for myself may have cost me my family, but at least now I finally felt like I had honored my grandparents' wishes. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to choose me. I had chosen myself. Update 5. After the court ruling, I decided it was time to move into the inherited house. I didn't plan on living there forever, but it felt like the right move for now. It was partly about making use of what was legally mine and partly about creating some distance from my family. The house held a lot of memories from when my grandparents were alive, and being there felt bittersweet. I remembered the summers spent in the backyard, the smell of my grandmother's cooking, and the sound of my grandfather's laughter. Now, it was just me, unpacking boxes and trying to turn it into a space that felt like my own. The first few weeks were quiet. I started making small changes, like repainting the walls and rearranging the furniture. It became almost therapeutic. Every stroke of paint, every item I put away, felt like I was reclaiming a part of my life that had been overshadowed by the family drama. The process helped me clear my head and made the house feel less like a battleground and more like a sanctuary. Then I started hearing rumors about Sam. Apparently he had borrowed money from a few friends for yet another business venture, which had already failed. He was back to his usual cycle, scrambling for a quick fix, making promises he couldn't keep. This time, though, things were different. The extended family who had backed him before were hesitant to help. Word had spread about the court case, and people were starting to see the pattern. It wasn't just me who had been taken advantage of. Sam had been manipulating everyone around him for years. My aunt, the same one who had supported me during the legal battle, reached out again. She wanted me to know that people in the family were finally starting to realize what had been going on. She said it wasn't much, but it felt like validation. For so long, I'd been the one fighting against this narrative that I was selfish or greedy. Now, the truth was starting to come out, and it was Sam who was being seen for who he really was. One day, my mom showed up at the house unexpectedly. I was caught off guard when I saw her standing on the front porch, looking nervous. I hesitated before letting her in. Part of me hoped she was there to apologize, to finally acknowledge everything that had happened. We sat down in the living room, and for a moment, it felt like old times. She started talking about the past, reminiscing about when we were kids. She didn't bring up the court case or the inheritance at all. It was like she was trying to rewrite the narrative, pretending everything was fine, but I wasn't going to let her sidestep the real issues. I gently steered the conversation back to the present, to the way they had treated me, and how hurtful it had been. My mom's expression changed. She didn't apologize. Instead, she started crying, saying she just wanted her family back together. She told me she couldn't believe I had chosen money over them. It was the same guilt-tripping I'd heard before, the same refusal to see things from my perspective. I calmly explained that it wasn't about money. It was about fairness, about standing up for myself after years of being overlooked. I told her that I wasn't the one who issued ultimatums or locked people out of their own property. She left in tears, saying she didn't understand how things had gotten so bad. I realized then that she never would. She wasn't ready to take responsibility for her actions, and I couldn't keep waiting for her to change. After that visit, I decided to go low contact with my parents. I didn't block them completely, but I made it clear I needed space. Sam, on the other hand, cut ties entirely. He blocked me on social media, and I haven't heard from him since the court ruling. It's like he decided that if he couldn't get what he wanted from me, he had no use for me at all. It hurt, but it was also a relief. I missed the brother I thought I had, but I knew this version of him was toxic, and I couldn't let that back into my life. I started going to therapy, something I probably should have done years ago. My therapist helped me unpack the years of favoritism and how it had shaped my self-worth. I realized that so many of my life choices had been driven by this need for my parents' approval, a need I was finally ready to let go of. For the first time in a long time, I was focusing on myself. I picked up old hobbies I'd neglected, started going out with friends again, and let myself enjoy life without the shadow of family expectations hanging over me. As the months passed, the house started to feel like home. It was no longer a symbol of conflict but of independence. I found a box of old family photos and keepsakes my aunt had dropped off. Inside, there was a handwritten note from my grandmother. It was short but sweet, telling me how proud she and my grandfather had been of me, of my resilience and strength. Reading those words, I broke down. It was the kind of love and support I had always wanted from my parents but never received. In that moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't before. I ended my latest post by thanking everyone on Reddit for their support. This community had been more of a family to me through this ordeal than my own blood relatives. I admitted that while I'd lost my relationship with my parents and brother, I'd gained something far more valuable, a sense of self-worth and independence I'd never had before. I've decided to stay in the house, at least for now. It feels right, like I'm honoring my grandparents' memory by making it a home filled with love, honesty, and peace, things I never really had growing up. I'm no longer waiting for my parents to choose me, because now I've finally chosen myself.